Welcome back to Crimson Archivium Roman weddings. Unlike the fairy tale ceremonies we imagine today, were intricate social, religious, and political affairs, reflecting the deep intertwining of family, religion, and societal hierarchy in ancient Rome. To the outsider, these ceremonies might appear opulent or even theatrical, with elaborate clothing, feasts, and public processions. Yet beneath this veneer of celebration lay a complex system of rules, symbolism, and ritualistic practices that reveal much about Roman values and fears. The veiled nature of these weddings, both literally and metaphorically, served to protect the sanctity of the marriage, while hiding some of the darker aspects that history would eventually seek to bury. At the heart of Roman matrimony was the concept of familia, the family unit as the foundation of society. Marriage was less about romantic love and more about alliance, continuity, and status. It was the bridge between two families, a contract that ensured property, political influence, and social prestige passed in predictable ways. The bride was often very young, sometimes in her early teens, and her primary purpose was to bear children, preferably sons, who could continue the family line. The groom, usually older, assumed both a protector and provider role. The ceremony thus was not merely a private union, but a public affirmation of social order and familial duty. The wedding attire itself was loaded with symbolism. The bride wore a tunic recta, a long white ankle-length garment, over which she draped a heavy red veil called the flammeum. The red color symbolized both fire and life, invoking fertility and the protection of the household hearth. This veil covered the bride from head to toe, obscuring her from the public gaze and shielding her from evil spirits, which Romans believed were ever-present and often malicious. The act of veiling was a powerful ritual gesture. The bride moved through the ceremony as both visible and invisible, embodying the liminal space between maidenhood and married life. The groom, in contrast, wore the toga virilis, signaling his full passage into adult citizenship and the assumption of responsibility. The ceremony began with the ritual of the dextrarum iunctio, or the joining of right hands, a solemn and binding gesture symbolizing unity and mutual obligation. This act, seemingly simple, carried legal weight. It marked the couple's recognition under Roman law and the social contract they were entering. Witnesses, usually close family members, were present to ensure legitimacy, while certain prayers and blessings were pronounced by the officiating priests. Among these, the flamens, priests of specific gods like Jupiter, played a key role, linking the union to divine oversight. Religion was never an accessory in Roman life. It was the framework within which every action, including marriage, was both meaningful and enforceable. Despite these public displays, much of the wedding's ritualistic depth remained hidden from ordinary observers. Certain ceremonies were performed behind closed doors or at night, away from prying eyes. The Romans believed that exposing these rites to the wrong gaze could attract malevolent forces or diminish the ritual's efficacy. This secrecy has contributed to the veil of mystery that surrounds Roman weddings today, leaving historians to piece together fragments from literature, inscriptions, and surviving artifacts. For example, while some texts reference the presence of certain symbolic objects, like wheat sheaves, torches, or ceremonial knives, their precise role remains a matter of debate. Were these merely symbolic, or did they serve a more ritualistic function intended to influence fertility, ward off evil, or even bind the couple's spirits together? The answers are tantalizingly elusive. One of the most striking aspects of Roman weddings was the blend of celebration and fear. The Romans were acutely aware of the fragility of life and the precariousness of social order. Weddings were joyful, yes, but they were also carefully designed to protect the union from misfortune. The use of charms, protective rituals, and symbolic gestures all served the purpose of controlling an uncertain future. The bride's veil, the groom's ceremonial gestures, the specific sequence of prayers, all these elements were tools for negotiating fate, ensuring prosperity, and appeasing the gods. In this sense, the wedding was as much about warding off potential disaster as it was about celebrating love or familial union. The role of community and spectators in these weddings cannot be overstated. While parts of the ceremony were private, the public procession, often accompanied by music, dancing, and feasting, demonstrated the legitimacy of the marriage and reinforced social bonds. Neighbors, clients, and extended family members were witnesses to the union, effectively creating a social guarantee that the couple would fulfill their duties. These spectators also served as moral monitors, ensuring that both families adhered to social and religious norms. In a society so invested in reputation and honor, the eyes of the community were as powerful as any divine oversight. Yet, for all its structure and grandeur, the Roman wedding also contained layers of mystery that would later be obscured or sanitized by historians. Certain rites, possibly involving symbolic bloodletting, binding of limbs, or other fertility-related acts, were deliberately downplayed or erased from later accounts. The reasons were many: the rise of Christianity, with its stricter moral codes, the political desire to present Roman culture as sophisticated and orderly, and the simple human inclination to sanitize uncomfortable truths. As a result, much of what we know today is filtered through layers of interpretation, conjecture, and selective record-keeping. In essence, the Roman wedding was a complex intersection of public display, private ritual, religious obligation, and societal expectation. Every gesture, garment, and spoken word carried meaning, reinforcing the couple's new social role while acknowledging the invisible forces, divine, social, and supernatural, that governed their lives. The bride's veiled figure, walking toward the altar, was more than a young woman entering marriage. She was a symbol of continuity, fertility, protection, and the ever-present tension between order and chaos in Roman society. These layers of meaning, veiled and sometimes hidden, are precisely what makes the study of ancient Roman weddings so fascinating, and why history at times tried to bury the full story. In ancient Rome, marriage was never merely a private affair between two individuals. It was a sacred contract intertwined with religion, politics, and societal order. One of the most fascinating and often overlooked aspects of Roman weddings was the involvement of religious figures, particularly the Vestal Virgins, whose influence extended far beyond their temple duties. These women, sworn to chastity and devoted to the goddess Vesta, the keeper of the hearth and the symbol of the Roman state, played a crucial role in mediating between the divine and the mortal during weddings. Their presence highlighted the deeply spiritual nature of matrimony in Rome, and the meticulous attention paid to rituals intended to ensure fertility, harmony, and divine favor. The Vestal Virgins were unique in Roman society. Selected as children between the ages of 6 and 10, they served for 30 years, maintaining the sacred fire of Vesta and performing various religious duties. Their virginity was not simply a personal virtue, but a symbol of Rome's purity and continuity. Involvement in weddings was one way this symbolic power was extended to the families of brides and grooms. Though not every wedding required the direct participation of a Vestal, elite families often invited them or performed rituals under their guidance to secure the gods' blessings. Their mere presence was considered auspicious, imbuing the marriage with a sacred legitimacy that ordinary officiants could not confer. At the heart of their influence were fertility and protection rites. Fertility was central to Roman marriage, not just for the continuation of the family line, but also for the perpetuation of societal stability. In some accounts, Vestal Virgins were responsible for preparing sacred offerings, such as cakes made from spelt flour, which the bride would consume to invoke fertility. Torches and fires, ever symbolic of Vesta, were often present, representing life, energy, and the domestic hearth. The rituals performed by the Vestals were highly symbolic. Each action, each prayer, was believed to channel divine favor into the marriage, ensuring the household would prosper, and that the children born of the union would be healthy and virtuous. Another critical aspect of Vestal involvement was their role in protecting the bride from malevolent forces. Romans were profoundly superstitious, believing that unseen spirits could disrupt marriages, cause infertility, or bring misfortune to the household. The Vestal's prayers, gestures, and carefully crafted symbols acted as a spiritual shield, Sometimes this included the use of protective charms, obscure gestures, or even incantations, details that later historians and moralists often omitted or sanitized from their accounts. These acts highlight the tension in Roman weddings between celebration and fear, joy and ritualistic caution, showing that marriage was considered a precarious threshold into adulthood, life, and legacy. Beyond protection and fertility, the Vestal Virgins also facilitated rites that emphasized social hierarchy and ritual purity. For example, elite Roman families often had the bride perform certain ceremonies in the presence of a Vestal to demonstrate her adherence to tradition and moral propriety. These could include acts of purification with water, symbolic gestures over the hearth, or offerings to household gods known as the lares and peanuts. Each act reinforced the idea that marriage was not only a personal bond, but a sacred duty to family, state, and the gods. The involvement of the Vestals elevated these ceremonies from mere social gatherings to ritual performances with profound spiritual resonance. Some scholars suggest that certain aspects of these sacred rites were deliberately kept secret, known only to the bride, the groom, and the religious officiants. For instance, accounts reference veiled symbolic acts, obscure prayers, and the manipulation of sacred objects whose precise meanings remain mysterious. The secrecy served multiple purposes. It protected the sanctity of the ritual, ensured its effectiveness by limiting exposure, and maintained the aura of the Vestal's sacred authority. This is one reason why modern historians struggle to reconstruct the full extent of their participation in Roman weddings. Much of what we know comes from indirect sources, such as writings of Roman historians, inscriptions, or legal texts regulating marriage, which often downplay or obscure the more esoteric practices. One particularly intriguing example of Vestal involvement concerns the so-called ritual of the joining of spirits. While the details are fragmented, evidence suggests that the Vestals might have presided over ceremonies that symbolically bound the couple not only to each other, but also to the divine order. This could involve gestures, chants, or the presence of ritual items meant to ensure that the bride and groom's union was aligned with the will of the gods. Some historians speculate that these rites included binding the couple in ways that reflected cosmic order, such as tying knots with symbolic cords or arranging ceremonial objects in patterns meant to harmonize their energies. These practices, though rarely detailed in surviving texts, highlight the profound spiritual and mystical dimension of Roman weddings. The Vestal's presence also carried a political dimension. Elite Roman families often sought the involvement of these sacred women as a demonstration of piety and status. Their participation signaled that the family had divine favor, moral integrity, and social influence. This was particularly important in a society where reputation, lineage, and political alliances were paramount. By securing the blessing of the Vestals, families could bolster their prestige and demonstrate that their household adhered to the sacred and moral codes of Rome. Interestingly, some rituals overseen by the Vestals blurred the line between sacred and terrifying. Ancient accounts hint at acts that may have seemed disturbing to outsiders: symbolic bloodletting, offerings of objects representing life and death, and gestures invoking protection against unseen evils. While concrete evidence is scarce, these hints suggest that weddings were not purely celebratory. They also involved the management of fears and anxieties surrounding fertility, mortality, and social harmony. In this way, the Vestals acted as both spiritual guides and guardians, mediating between human vulnerability and divine power. Finally, the involvement of Vestal virgins in marriage rituals underscores the broader Roman worldview, in which every human action, particularly those with social and familial significance, was bound to religious observance. Marriage was more than a personal or legal contract. It was a sacred duty, a conduit for divine influence, and a reflection of societal values. By integrating the Vestals into these ceremonies, Romans ensured that the union was both socially recognized and spiritually sanctioned. Their role reminds us that in ancient Rome, the line between religion and daily life was virtually invisible. The sacred permeated every domestic and civic act. In conclusion, the Vestal Virgins and their sacred rites were integral to the Roman wedding, linking the couple to the divine and embedding marriage within a network of ritual, protection, and social hierarchy. Their influence ensured that marriages were not only legally valid, but spiritually potent, guarding the bride and groom against misfortune, enhancing fertility, and legitimizing the union in the eyes of gods and society alike. The secrecy and symbolic depth of their involvement are precisely why later historians either downplayed or omitted these aspects, contributing to the hidden or buried history of Roman weddings. Understanding the role of Vestals illuminates a side of Roman culture where spirituality, power, and personal life intertwined in ways both fascinating and mysterious, a testament to the complexity of Roman society and the enduring mystique of its sacred traditions. While the outward appearance of a Roman wedding, veiled brides, festive banquets, and joyous processions, suggests a celebration steeped in tradition and social order, the reality beneath the ceremonial surface was far more complex. Ancient Roman weddings were loaded with symbolic acts, some of which were deliberately hidden from public view, reflecting both the practical concerns of fertility and lineage, and the Romans' deeply ingrained belief in the supernatural. These secret rituals, often performed in private or under the supervision of religious authorities, reveal a society where marriage was not merely a union of two individuals, but a ritualized negotiation with fate, gods, and ancestral spirits. One of the most striking aspects of these hidden rituals involved blood symbolism. Blood in Roman culture was not merely biological, it carried profound spiritual and symbolic weight. It was associated with life, vitality, fertility, and paradoxically, with danger and potential destruction. Certain accounts suggest that, in elite households, brides might participate in symbolic acts involving animal blood, or even the careful use of their own blood in ritual gestures. This was not done for brutality's sake, but as a sacred act, intended to bind the couple spiritually and to invoke the life-giving power of the gods. Blood, in this context, acted as a bridge between the human and divine realms, a tangible substance capable of carrying prayers and intentions. The concept of binding was equally central to the sea rituals. Beyond the legal and ceremonial joining of hands, Roman weddings often included symbolic acts that physically or visually represented the bond between husband and wife. This could involve tying their wrists or hands with cords, arranging ceremonial knots, or even manipulating sacred objects in ways meant to create a spiritual connection. The knots, often intricate and deliberate, symbolized unity, fidelity, and the intertwining of two lives into one cohesive force. Some historians speculate that these cords were ritually charged with prayers or charms, turning the simple act of binding into a powerful metaphysical act intended to secure marital harmony and fertility. In this sense, the wedding became not just a public agreement, but a magical contract with consequences extending into the spiritual realm. Symbolism in Roman weddings extended far beyond physical gestures. Objects, colors, and materials all carried encoded meanings that connected the couple to life, death, protection, and prosperity. The bride's red veil, or flammeum, is perhaps the most obvious example, symbolizing fire, vitality, and the sacred hearth. But other objects, such as wheat, herbs, small figurines, or torches, played equally important roles in the hidden rituals. Wheat sheaves, for instance, were not merely decorative, they represented fertility, abundance, and the promise of children. Torches symbolized life, divine light, and the safeguarding of the domestic sphere from malign spirits. Even seemingly mundane gestures, such as walking in a specific direction or stepping over particular thresholds, were imbued with symbolic intent, reflecting the Romans' obsession with ritual precision. Some of the most mysterious and controversial rituals revolved around the manipulation of fate itself. Roman weddings often involved actions that echoed both creation and destruction, life and death. Certain rites may have included symbolic sacrifices, not always literal blood sacrifices, but ritual gestures representing the surrender of the O.L.D. self to the new life of marriage. These acts reinforced the idea that marriage was a transition into a new spiritual and social state, one that required both reverence and careful management of unseen forces. In elite circles, it is possible that some ceremonies included the use of obscure incantations or chants, whose meanings were intentionally kept secret, accessible only to those trained in the rituals. The goal was clear: to ensure the couple's prosperity, protect them from spiritual harm, and maintain the sanctity of the family lineage. The private and secretive nature of these rituals was crucial. While public ceremonies showcased status, legality, and social conformity, hidden rituals addressed the invisible threats that the Romans feared: jealous gods, malevolent spirits, and misfortune. Some historians suggest that the bride and groom might have performed parts of the ceremony at night or in secluded spaces to maintain the ritual's efficacy. The secrecy also reinforced the authority of religious officiants, such as Vestal virgins or household priests, who acted as mediators between the mortal and divine worlds. By controlling access to sacred knowledge and ritual actions, these religious figures amplified the mystery and power surrounding Roman weddings, ensuring that the marriage carried spiritual weight as well as legal legitimacy. Another dimension of these hidden rituals was their connection to societal control and moral instruction. By embedding symbolic teas into the wedding, Roman culture reinforced expectations for gender roles, fidelity, and domestic responsibility. The bride's participation in purification rites, symbolic blood gestures, or binding rituals demonstrated her obedience and readiness to assume her role as mother, wife, and caretaker of the household. The groom's participation, meanwhile, often emphasized his responsibility to protect, provide, and uphold the moral and social order. Every gesture, whether public or hidden, reinforced the values and hierarchy central to Roman life, turning the wedding into a ritualized microcosm of society itself. Interestingly, the symbolism of death and danger was not absent from these ceremonies. Certain rituals may have included actions that represented the bride leaving her old life behind, symbolic deaths and rebirths that mirrored agricultural cycles or cosmic order. This connection to mortality underscores the Roman awareness of the fragility of life and the precariousness of social and familial stability. By confronting these anxieties through symbolic acts, the Romans sought to harness ritual power to protect the household, ensure fertility, and secure continuity. Despite their importance, many of these hidden rituals were erased or sanitized by later historians, particularly during the rise of Christianity. Acts involving blood, obscure chants, or symbolic binding were either omitted or interpreted allegorically, contributing to the perception that Roman weddings were solely grandiose and orderly affairs. In reality, these rituals reveal a society deeply engaged with unseen forces, where marriage was a negotiation with fate as much as a celebration of love or social alliance. The interplay of blood, binding, and symbolism demonstrates the Romans' sophisticated understanding of ritual power and the human desire to influence destiny through sacred acts. Ultimately, the hidden rituals of Roman weddings, whether through blood, binding, or symbolic objects, offer a window into a world where marriage was as much spiritual and mystical as legal and social. The couple was not merely exchanging vows, they were participating in a sacred drama that intertwined their lives with cosmic forces, ancestral spirits, and divine favor. These rituals, hidden from casual observation and obscured by history, remind us that Roman weddings were far more than spectacles. They were carefully orchestrated negotiations with fate, a blend of celebration, fear, and spiritual rigor designed to secure the stability and prosperity of the family and society. The legacy of these practices persists in subtle ways in modern traditions. Veils, symbolic knots, ritual dances, and fertility charms echo the ancient rituals, though stripped of their original intensity and meaning. Understanding the hidden layers of Roman weddings, the blood, the binding, the symbolism, provides not only a richer picture of Roman society, but also a profound appreciation for the power and purpose the why attributed to marriage. What seems today as quaint or ceremonial was, in ancient Rome, a sacred, potent, and sometimes frightening negotiation with the unseen forces that governed life itself. Ancient Roman weddings were not always orderly celebrations of social and religious harmony. Behind the flammeum, veiled brides, and elaborate feasts, there lurked a world of scandal, misstep, and social consequence, reflecting the high stakes of marriage in a society obsessed with reputation, morality, and divine favor. While today we often view marriage as a private, personal choice, in Rome, it was a public event with legal, religious, and social implications, and any deviation from the expected norms could provoke punishment, shame, or scandal. These events and the customs that accompanied them reveal a side of Roman weddings that history often sought to bury. One of the most significant sources of scandal was marital impropriety, particularly on the part of the bride. Roman society placed enormous emphasis on female chastity before marriage, viewing it as a moral and social obligation. A bride caught in premarital sexual activity could face extreme consequences, including public humiliation or, in some cases, legal penalties. Ancient texts describe instances where families would delay or cancel weddings due to suspected impropriety, a scandal that could tarnish the reputations of both the bride's and groom's families. This intense scrutiny reflects the deep connection Romans made between sexual conduct, family honor, and the perceived favor of the gods. Fertility and divine blessing were thought to be contingent on moral correctness. A bride or groom who violated societal norms risked spiritual as well as social consequences. The groom, too, could be implicated in scandal. Marriages were often arranged for political alliances or social advancement, and any deviation from the agreed terms could have severe repercussions. For example, a groom who failed to demonstrate proper respect during the wedding rituals, or who attempted to repudiate a bride for personal reasons, could be punished socially or even legally. The Roman concept of pietas, a combination of duty to family, gods, and society, demanded strict adherence to ceremonial norms. Breaches of these duties were not merely personal failures, they were public transgressions, threatening the moral and spiritual balance of the household. Beyond individual misbehavior, certain ritual failures or omissions could provoke scandal. Roman weddings involved elaborate sequences of rites, gestures, and symbolic acts, ranging from offerings to the household gods to the ceremonial joining of hands. Missing a step, performing an action incorrectly, or misunderstanding a symbolic gesture could be interpreted as a serious offense, potentially inviting misfortune or divine wrath. For elite families whose marriages were as much about public image as personal union, ritual errors were a source of embarrassment and gossip, sometimes recorded by contemporary historians as cautionary tales. These minor missteps, amplified by superstition and social scrutiny, illustrate the high-pressure environment surrounding Roman nuptials. Some of the most extreme and sensationalized scandals revolved around ritual transgressions or perversions. Ancient sources occasionally hint at practices that, if done incorrectly or too publicly, could be viewed as immoral or taboo. For example, certain fertility rites involving symbolic blood or sacred binding were meant to be private and controlled. Exposure to outsiders could provoke outrage, ridicule, or even fear. Similarly, rituals that involved symbolic death and rebirth, designed to represent the bride's transition from maidenhood to married life, could be misunderstood by onlookers, leading to social condemnation. These hidden ceremonies, while spiritually potent, were also fragile. Their secrecy was essential, and any breach could create scandal. Another fascinating dimension of scandal was the role of social hierarchy and class tension in weddings. Marriages often reinforced or negotiated power structures, and breaches of class expectations could provoke public outrage. For example, a marriage between a patrician and a plebeian could be considered scandalous, especially if ceremonial norms were compromised or public opinion was unfavorable. Similarly, weddings of freed women or slaves, though increasingly common in certain contexts, were often scrutinized. For adherence to ritual norms, as deviations could be interpreted as moral failings or challenges to social order. These scandals were more than gossip. They had tangible social consequences, potentially affecting property inheritance, political alliances, and family reputation for generations. Punishments for wedding-related transgressions could be severe and often public. Historical records indicate that families could face fines, ritual cleansing, or public censure for impropriety. In rare but dramatic cases, ceremonial missteps could provoke extreme penalties, particularly when religion and law intersected. For example, if a bride violated sacred vows or offended the household gods, she might be subject to ritual purification or public penance. Similarly, a groom who disrespected ritual forms could be shamed or socially ostracized. These consequences were designed not only to punish individuals but also to reinforce societal and divine norms, demonstrating the stakes involved in a seemingly personal affair. Perhaps even more striking are the forgotten customs of Roman weddings that were deliberately erased or sanitized by later historians. Practices that involved ritualized sexual symbolism, fertility charms, or obscure rites of transition were often downplayed or omitted, particularly as Roman society transitioned under Christian influence. For example, symbolic acts involving fertility, binding, or symbolic death and rebirth, central to the marriage rite, were later recognized as allegorical or dismissed as superstition. The deliberate erasure of these customs contributed to the perception of Roman weddings as orderly and decorous, masking the reality of ritual complexity, social anxiety, and moral scrutiny. Despite their potential for scandal, these punishments and hidden customs reveal a society deeply invested in controlling fate, morality, and social order. Roman weddings were microcosms of broader societal values, where the personal, the political, and the spiritual intersected. Scandal was not merely entertainment, it was a signal that divine favor or social propriety had been compromised. Punishment served as both deterrent and correction, reinforcing the rituals and behaviors necessary to maintain harmony within families and communities. In addition to moral and religious consequences, some wedding scandals had lasting legal and familial implications. Marriages determined inheritance, political alliances, and family continuity, so a scandalous wedding could jeopardize property rights, the legitimacy of children, or social standing. Elite families were acutely aware that even minor deviations from ritual or decorum could ripple across generations, creating long-term vulnerabilities in wealth, status, and influence. These high stakes added a layer of tension and anxiety to every wedding, underscoring the idea that marriage in ancient Rome was a complex, carefully managed endeavor, rather than a simple personal celebration. Ultimately, candles, punishments, and forgotten customs illustrate the duality of Roman weddings. They were simultaneously joyous and fraught with danger, public and secretive, social and sacred. The very elements that made marriage a public affirmation of family, status, and piety also made it a potential site of humiliation, legal jeopardy, and spiritual vulnerability. Understanding these aspects provides a more nuanced view of Roman society, one in which personal life was inseparable from religious obligation, social expectation, and the ever-present threat of scandal. The hidden, scandalous, and punishing aspects of Roman weddings, often downplayed or erased by historians, offer a window into the intense moral and spiritual scrutiny that governed daily life. From ritual missteps to breaches of chastity, from class tensions to the delicate orchestration of sacred acts, these incidents reveal a world in which marriage was a delicate balance of celebration, fear, and obedience. The stories that survive, fragmentary and tantalizing, hint at the richness and complexity of ancient Roman marital practices and the reasons why much of this history was deliberately buried or forgotten. Ancient Roman weddings, with their layers of public ceremony, hidden rituals, and social significance, left a legacy that extends far beyond the walls of the empire. While much of the more controversial and secretive aspects of these weddings, ritualized blood gestures, binding ceremonies, and fertility rites, were Deliberately buried by historians or suppressed by later Christian moral codes, their influence on cultural practices, legal norms, and symbolic traditions is both profound and enduring. Understanding this legacy allows us not only to appreciate the complexity of Roman society, but also to see the echoes of ancient rituals in modern weddings and the broader interpretation of marriage as both a social contract and a spiritual covenant. One of the most tangible legacies of Roman weddings is ritual symbolism, which persists in many forms across cultures today. The bridal veil, for example, is one of the most recognizable remnants of Roman matrimonial practice. In Rome, the bride's flammeum, a red fiery veil, symbolized protection, fertility, and the transition from maidenhood to married life. While modern veils have lost much of their original symbolic weight, the act of veiling still signifies modesty, sacredness, and the bride's transition into a new social and personal role. Similarly, the ceremonial joining of hands, or dextrarum iunctio, has echoes in the contemporary ritual of hand-holding during vows, symbolizing unity, commitment, and mutual obligation. These gestures, though adapted and secularized, retain the essence of the ancient Roman belief that marriage is a binding contract, both spiritual and social. Another significant legacy is the integration of religion and ritual into marital practice. Roman weddings were inseparable from religious observance, with priests, vestal virgins, and sacred rites ensuring divine favor. While the specifics of these rituals are largely lost, the principle that marriage involves spiritual sanction persists in many modern traditions. Whether in Christian, Jewish, Hindu, or other religious ceremonies, weddings often include blessings, prayers, and symbolic acts designed to secure divine favor and moral guidance. This continuity reflects a deeply human desire to link marital unions with higher forces, ensuring protection, fertility, and prosperity, values that were central to Roman matrimonial thought. The hidden and controversial aspects of Roman weddings also influenced later legal and social frameworks. Roman marriage law, particularly the concepts of manus, the legal authority of the husband over the wife, and the formal recognition of legitimate heirs, laid the foundation for Western legal systems concerning family, inheritance, and property rights. The meticulous documentation of marriage, the role of witnesses, and the emphasis on social hierarchy provided a blueprint for subsequent legal traditions. Even as Western societies evolved and legal equality between spouses became more common, the Roman insistence on marriage as a structured social contract influenced the way family law developed, highlighting the balance between personal union and societal obligation. The rituals surrounding fertility, protection, and binding in Roman weddings also found echoes in folk practices and superstitions. Across Europe and beyond, wedding customs often include symbolic acts meant to ensure prosperity, fertility, or marital harmony. Examples include throwing rice or grains, representing abundance, tying ribbons or cords around the couple's hands, or incorporating charms and amulets into ceremonies. These practices, while culturally distinct, resonate with the Roman emphasis on controlling unseen forces through ritualized symbolism. Even modern wedding cakes, bouquets, and ceremonial dances can be traced back, in some form, to the belief that symbolic acts influence the future well-being of the marriage and family. The selective preservation and suppression of Roman wedding practices also shaped the interpretation of marriage in historical narratives. As the Roman Empire transitioned to Christianity, many of the more controversial rituals, especially those involving blood, symbolic death, or sexualized fertility rites, were omitted from official records or reframed as moral lessons. Later historians, aiming to portray Rome as civilized and morally upright, emphasized decorum and order while downplaying secrecy, scandal, and mystical practices. This filtering of history created a sanitized narrative, one that influenced medieval and early modern perceptions of marriage as a solemn moralized ceremony rather than a dynamic and ritual-rich social institution. The buried aspects of Roman weddings, though obscured, continue to fascinate scholars and enthusiasts, revealing a society where the sacred, the social, and the personal were inseparably intertwined. Modern scholars have also highlighted the psychological and social functions of Roman wedding rituals. Hidden rites of binding, fertility, and protection were not merely symbolic, they addressed human anxieties about marriage, lineage, and mortality. By participating in structured rituals, both public and private, brides and grooms, as well as their families, could navigate uncertainty, manage social expectations, and assert control over fate. This recognition of the emotional and psychological dimensions of ritual underscores the enduring human need for ceremonies that provide structure, meaning, and reassurance during life transitions. Contemporary weddings, with their elaborate choreography, symbolic objects, and communal involvement, continue to fulfill these psychological functions, echoing ancient practices in form, if not in exact content. The rediscovery and reinterpretation of these ancient practices also shed light on gender roles and social power in Roman society. While Roman weddings were structured to emphasize male authority and female obedience, they also provided women with a spiritual and symbolic role, especially through interactions with Vestal virgins and household rituals. The bride, though legally subordinate, became a particip in sacred acts that conferred protection and continuity on the household. This duality, subservience in legal terms but power in ritual terms, offers a nuanced perspective on gender in antiquity and invites modern reflection on how rituals continue to define and negotiate power dynamics in marriage today. Finally, the modern fascination with the hidden and scandalous elements of Roman weddings reflects a broader cultural interest in the secret lives of ancient societies. From historical novels to films and academic studies, the rituals, superstitions, and symbolic acts that were deliberately obscured by history captivate the imagination. They challenge our assumptions about the past, revealing a world where marriage was not merely ceremonial but a profound intersection of law, religion, psychology, and social order. In studying these practices, we gain insight not only into Roman society but also into enduring human concerns, the desire for security, continuity, fertility, and approval from both community and divine forces. In conclusion, the legacy of Roman weddings is both visible and hidden, tangible and symbolic. From veils and ceremonial gestures to legal frameworks, religious sanction, and symbolic acts of protection and fertility, the influence of these ancient practices endures in countless ways. While much of the most controversial and secretive aspects were buried by later historians, their echoes remain in modern traditions, legal structures, and cultural interpretations of marriage. By examining these rituals and their transformations over time, we gain a deeper appreciation for the complexity, spirituality, and social significance of Roman weddings, and we recognize that marriage, in every age, is far more than a personal union. It is a ritualized negotiation with society, history, and the unseen forces that shape human life.